Imagine. Stop whatever you're doing and imagine this. A warrior, skin crawling with intricate tattoos of mythical beasts, griffins locked in combat, spiraling patterns that writhe with every flex of muscle, a golden bow gleaming in the harsh sun, emerging from a sea of grass so vast it swallows empires whole. The wind howls through the feathergrass, carrying the scent of wormwood and distant snowmelt. You know their name, the Scythians, the horse lords of the ancient steppe, ghosts on horseback who struck without warning and vanished like smoke. Herodotus wrote about them, his quill practically trembling as he spun terrifying tales of wild men who drank from the skulls of their enemies, who scalped their fallen foes and used the skin as napkins. A single, unstoppable, genetically pure race that swept from the east like a biblical plague, a punishment from the gods themselves. For centuries, that was the story burned into our history books, a cautionary tale whispered in the marble halls of Greece and the mud brick palaces of Assyria. But today, in the next few minutes, you're going to watch that entire story collapse under the weight of evidence so precise it can count the very atoms of ancestry. Because what if your own DNA, the ancestry pumping through your veins right now, holds the key to a secret that has left scientists speechless? We are about to launch a genetic manhunt. We will take the DNA profile of the Scythians and compare it, one by one, against every major ancient civilization you can think of. We will systematically eliminate them. The Romans, with their aqueducts and legions, the Greeks, with their philosophy and phalanxes, the Celts, with their torques and hill forts, the Bronze Age steppe giants who built the pyramids of the north. We'll cross them off the list, pushing further and further east, across mountains and millennia, until only one unthinkable lineage remains. A lineage that isn't just a single tribe, but a shocking, impossible confederation of peoples that were never supposed to be related, locked in a biological embrace that flies in the face of everything the ancient chroniclers believed. A hidden truth that rewrites the entire history of the Iron Age, and with it, the very meaning of identity itself. This isn't just another history lesson. This is the Scythian genetic mystery. And by the end of this, everything you thought you knew will be wrong. For decades, the story we were told was simple. It was a narrative painted in broad, brutal strokes, derived from the terrified accounts of the settled civilizations of the Near East and the pontifications of Greek historians like Herodotus and Hippocrates. The Scythians were the monster under the bed of the ancient world, the embodiment of chaos and untamed nature. They emerged from the dark, unknown reaches of Siberia, a homogenous horde of ferocious, mounted archers, speaking a single Iranian language, sharing a single, savage culture, and carrying a single, dominating bloodline. This was the classic invasionist model, a mental shortcut that turned complex human processes into a simple flood of bodies. A massive, unified wave of people, genetically identical, who poured down from the mountains to crush the Sumerians, terrorize the Assyrians with their strange customs, and push into the very heart of Europe, skirmishing with Thracians and leaving their mark on the Carpathian Basin. The archaeological records seem to support this monolithic vision beautifully. From the frozen tombs of the Altai Mountains, where permafrost preserved the skin and silk of the Pazyryk chiefs, to the sprawling royal kurgans of Ukraine that scar the landscape like giant earthen bells, a distinct Scythian triad of artifacts appeared like a universal signature, a brand stamped across the steppe. You'd find the same essential toolkit: elaborate horse harnesses with carved cheek pieces, deadly trilobate bronze arrowheads that could punch through a shield, and exquisite animal-style art, with prowling panthers, spiraling griffins, and stags with their legs tucked beneath them, antlers swept back in a great sweeping arc, frozen in eternal stylized combat. If you saw a stag in that specific contorted pose, you knew you were in Scythian territory, whether you were on the banks of the Dnieper or the high plateaus of Mongolia. The cultural uniformity was breathtaking, a shared visual language stretching over 3,000 miles. And so, the logical conclusion was drawn, a simple equation that felt so intuitive: culture equals people. A unified artistic language meant a unified genetic source, a single tribe moving and conquering. The Scythians were a people, a race, a closed, migrating biological entity. That was the story. It was neat, it was terrifying, but as science would eventually reveal with uncompromising clarity, it was also completely, utterly wrong. The first fractures in this monolithic narrative came from a quiet, meticulous source: the bones themselves. Physical anthropologists measuring skulls from kurgan to kurgan, began to notice subtle but persistent differences in the cranial architecture of skeletons found in different parts of the steppe. A skull from the Altai didn't quite match the shape of a skull from the Black Sea coast. But bones can change based on diet, on environment, on the stresses of a lifetime. To truly crack the case, we needed a time machine, a way to bypass the plastic nature of bone. We needed to read the story written in an ancient script that doesn't lie, a script that records every ancestral union, every migration, every mixing event with absolute fidelity. We needed the ancient record of the Scythians' own biological code. We needed DNA. The discovery didn't happen all at once with a single eureka moment. It was a slow, meticulous scientific revolution, a decade-long forensic process culminating in a series of landmark studies in the late 2010s and early 2020s. A team of international geneticists, led by pioneers like Peter de Barros Damgard, Nina Marchi, and Guido Alberto Gnecchi Rusconi, did something unprecedented in its scale and ambition. They gathered the remains of not just a few Scythian elites from a single famous site, but over 100 individuals, a skeletal army representing the full geographic and temporal sweep of Scythian existence. They sampled warriors from the frozen tombs of Pazyryk in the Altai, where the preservation was so perfect they could analyze the DNA of the horses buried alongside them. They collected chieftains from the Aldibel culture of Tuva. They took samples from nomads buried in the lush, black earth grasslands of the North Pontic region in what is now Ukraine, the very heartland of Herodotus's royal Scythians. The goal was staggeringly ambitious: to sequence 137 ancient human genomes from across the entire Eurasian steppe, creating a genetic transect, a biological map, stretching across thousands of miles and just as many years, from the late Bronze Age deep into the Iron Age. Now, the moment of truth arrived, a silent, data-driven climax. The researchers fed the sequences into powerful computers, ready to compare the Scythian code against a vast database of other ancient peoples. A digital lineup of Eurasian history. This is the comparative elimination that changed everything. First, they lined up the Scythian genome against the great civilizations of the Mediterranean. The target was matched against the Romans. The screen flashed its cold calculation: no close match. The imperial blood of Rome, a complex Mediterranean mix of Anatolian farmers and European hunter-gatherers, was an entirely distinct genetic universe. Next, they compared it against the DNA of the classical Greeks, the very people who wrote the Scythian histories, who traded with them and fought them. The result was a stark, unambiguous rejection. The city-states of Athens and Sparta, with their own deep Aegean ancestry, were a separate genetic world. The Celts of Central and Western Europe, the great Iron Age power of the West, were loaded into the algorithm. The comparison ran, a probabilistic test of shared ancestry, and the signal dropped to zero. No match. The Scythians were not a lost Celtic tribe that had wandered east. The geneticists then moved their search eastward, testing the most plausible traditional hypothesis: a direct, unbroken lineage from the powerful Bronze Age pastoralists of the steppe, the Yamnaya and the Srubnaya cultures, who had dominated the region for millennia, building huge burial mounds and spreading their genes across continents. Surely, the Scythians were just a direct continuation of these magnificent steppe giants, an ancestral ghost given new flesh. The comparison was run. The screen held a secret. There was a connection, yes, a whisper of shared ancestry, like the faint, distant echo of a common ancestor thousands of years back. But it was not a direct match. The Scythians were not simply Srubnaya 2.0, a new iteration of the same old stock. The elimination continued, a methodical sweep across the prehistoric world. The powerful Andronovo culture, the chariot warriors of the central steppe who spread Indo-Iranian languages across Asia, were placed in the dock. No match. The hunter-gatherers of the Siberian taiga, the ancient North Eurasian ghost population that contributes ancestry to both Europeans and Native Americans. A partial signal flickered, a tantalizing hint, but not a complete one. Finally, the geneticists looked to the Far East, to a region deep in the Altai-Sayan Mountains, a place where the Bronze Age collided with the Iron Age in a crucible of cultural change. They compared the Scythian genetic signal against a specific, enigmatic group, the late Bronze Age herders of the eastern steppe, known from a place called Kovsgol in northern Mongolia, and their deep, ancient connections to West Siberian hunter-gatherers from places like the Minusinsk Basin. The machine lit up. A brilliant, undeniable match, a statistical firework display of shared genetic drift. And then, With a twist that shattered the old narrative like a bronze arrowhead through clay, the computer mapped the rest of the Scythian puzzle. The half that was missing, the other vital component of their ancestry, wasn't from the East at all. It was a major pulse of ancestry from the European Bronze Age, a signal related to the very corded ware and Srubnaya cultures that had been rejected in their pure form, now reappearing in a perfect, intimate mixture, fused at the most fundamental level of the double helix. The Scythians were not a pure race, a closed biological lineage. They were a genetic alloy forged in a crucible on the steppe, a compound of two wildly different elements that made something stronger and entirely new. The elimination process was complete. Every other major civilization, every single hypothesized source, had been crossed off the list. The sole surviving source was a profound, previously unknown admixture event, a biological fusion of two peoples from opposite ends of the ancient world, a union so secret it had left no trace in the chronicles of kings or the myths of heroes. Let's break down the evidence, because this is where the science gets truly mind-bending, moving from historical narrative to the hard, quantifiable language of population genetics. The old model predicted a single, flat genetic line running from east to west, a homogeneous block of biological sameness. The new model, revealed by the Damgard and Gunnecki-Rusconi studies and visualized through principal component analyses and admixture graphs, showed something radically different: a genetic cline. Imagine a smooth gradient of color stretching across a map, like the subtle shift of a sunset from amber to sapphire. That's the Scythian world. In the Far East, in the Iron Age Paziric culture of the Altai Mountains, the individuals we tested had a dominant genetic signature. Think of it as a deep, rich amber, representing the ancestry of those late Bronze Age Eastern herders from Kovsgol and their ancient connections to West Siberian hunter-gatherers. This Eastern ancestry makes up the vast majority of their genome, sometimes upwards of 60 to 70%. It's a signal linked to the ancient hunter-gatherers of Siberia and the Bronze Age populations of the Kovsgol region, a lineage that had been evolving in relative isolation in the eastern forests and steppes for millennia. This is reflected in the Y chromosome lineages that were passed from father to son, an unbroken genetic surname that traces paternal descent. In the Eastern Scythian men, we find a high frequency of haplogroups like R1HZ93, a classic steppe marker spread by Bronze Age pastoralists, but also a significant, telltale presence of QL53 lineages. This Q lineage is a paternal line with incredibly deep roots in Siberia and the ancient populations that crossed the Bering Strait, a genetic echo of the taiga, the tundra, the deep eastern wilds, and the very first peoples of the Americas. Now, let's travel 4,000 miles to the west. Move your eyes to the other end of the spectrum, to the rich, black earth of the North Pontic steppe, the realm of the royal Scythians who traded grain with Athens and buried their kings under mountains of soil. Here, the genetic gradient has shifted to a completely different color. The amber of the east is now a profound sapphire blue. Though it's not a pure blue, the amber is still there, just in a much smaller proportion. This is the European signal, dominating the admixture. The Western Scythian genomes are a near-even mix, but the influx from the west is enormous, fundamentally changing their genetic profile. The source of this blue is a population related to the European Bronze Age, deep-time relatives of the Srubnaya culture of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, and ultimately, the vast corded ware complex that once stretched from the Rhine to the Volga, a horizon of people who buried their single graves under earthen mounds and spread Indo-European languages across a continent. The proof is locked, with forensic certainty, in the Y chromosomes. The dominant paternal lineage in the Western Scythian kings is not the Eastern Q, nor the R1AZ93 in the same proportion. It is overwhelmingly R1BZ2103. This is a line that connects them directly to the great Bronze Age expansions of Europe, the deepest roots of the continent's western edge, a lineage that would later ride into Anatolia and across the Caucasus. It's a direct refutation of a single, unified invading army, all sworn to a single king. You cannot have a homogeneous horde if the kings in the west are carrying the paternal line of Europe, while the chieftains in the east carry the paternal line of Siberia. The men were not all from the same father. The biological reality of a homogeneous Scythian race simply evaporates under this scrutiny. But what about the mothers? The mitochondrial DNA, the tiny circular genome passed down strictly through the maternal line from a mother to all her children, adds another layer of breathtaking complexity, a matrilineal narrative that enriches the whole story. The mtDNA diversity in both Eastern and Western Scythian groups was incredibly, unexpectedly high. It was a genetic kaleidoscope, a swirling mixture of lineages. We see a complex matrix of West Eurasian lineages, the classic European haplogroups like H, U, and T, lineages that had been circulating in Europe since the Neolithic farmers and the Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, side by side with deeply East Eurasian lineages, like C, D, and F, whose origins lie in the remote past of Siberia and East Asia. The proportions shift along the cline, of course, with more Eastern mtDNA in the East and more Western in the West. But the crucial point is that the mixture is present everywhere. There is no pure group. This is not a picture of a small, isolated tribe moving and keeping to themselves, marrying only within their own kind. This is a picture of a thriving, dynamic network where women from vastly different origins were integrated into the Scythian social fabric, whether through long-distance marriage alliances brokered between distant clans, the peaceful absorption of disparate groups into the Scythian political sphere, or the capture and integration of individuals from conquered peoples. The genetic evidence dismantles the idea of a pure, closed bloodline with surgical precision. It replaces it with a dynamic, multi-ethnic confederation where your identity was not solely determined by your genes, but by the culture you belonged to, the oaths you swore, and the life you lived. The Scythian triad, the weaponry, the horse gear, the animal art, was a powerful unifying ideology, a shared language of power and prestige that could be adopted by genetically diverse peoples across the steppe. You could be born with a European paternal line like R1b, a Siberian maternal line like C, and yet, if you were buried with a golden comb topped with a battling stag, if you drank from a horn and rode with a bow, you were Scythian. It was a political and cultural choice, a shared identity forged on the open steppe, not a sentence written immutably in the blood. But the evidence doesn't just reveal a static cline, a snapshot of a moment. The 2021 Science Advances study, led by Gneki Ruscone, did something even more remarkable. It pinpointed the exact, explosive moment of ethnogenesis, the biological Big Bang that birthed the Scythian world. The very birth of the Scythian genetic profile was a single, dramatic event, a previously unknown major admixture that happened right at the dawn of the Iron Age, around the 9th to 7th century BCE, a time of climate shifts and sweeping technological change. This was the Big Bang of the Scythian world. The algorithm, using sophisticated methods like admixture dating, shows a sudden, massive fusion of two distinct ancestral populations that had been separated for millennia. The first source was a population related to the Kovsgol LBA herders of the eastern steppe. The second source was a population related to the Shrubnaya culture of the western steppe. These two groups, separated by a continent, met and merged in a very short window of time, perhaps just a few generations, creating a new, unique genetic signature that we can now call Scythian. It was this new, mixed profile that then spread across the steppe, not as a replacement of local populations in a genocidal wave, but as a catalyst for further, continuous admixture. The initial fusion was the spark, the striking of a match, but the subsequent millennia were a slow-burning fire of constant genetic exchange. Mobility was the Scythian superpower, the key to their entire way of life. The horse was their transformative technology, a living vehicle that compressed distance, and the steppe was their natural highway, an unbroken corridor of grass stretching from Manchuria to the Danube. The DNA shows that gene flow didn't stop after the initial formation. It was a persistent, long-term process, a biological background hum of movement. People were constantly moving, marrying, and burying their dead across vast distances, their genes flowing like water across the porous borders of the Scythian horizon, creating the smooth genetic gradient we see in the data. The Scythian world was not a static block of tribes, a chessboard of fixed pieces. It was a river of genes, perpetually in motion, a churning, mixing biological system. So what does this stunning revelation change? The implications are profound, and they hit at the very core of identity. Not just for historians in dusty libraries, but for you, right now. For anyone who has ever taken a commercial DNA test, looked at their ancestry composition pie chart, and asked, "Who am I? Where do I come from?" The Scythian story is a powerful, science-backed corrective to the dangerous and persistent myth of ethnic purity. We live in a world obsessed with the idea of tracing our lineage back to a single, pure tribe, a golden age of unmixed ancestors. The true Celt, the original Viking, the first Scythian. This ancient DNA data shatters that fantasy into 1,000 pieces. It proves, beyond any statistical doubt, that one of the most iconic and feared cultures in history was, from its very first breath, from its very moment of ethnogenesis, a genetically mixed, multi-ethnic confederation. There was no pure Scythian genome, no platonic ideal of a Scythian to compare all others to. The royal Scythian of the Pontic steppe, the horse lord who made Herodotus's quill tremble with tales of his ferocity, carried the paternal lineage of a European Bronze Age man. The Paziric chief in the frozen Altai, entombed in a log house with his sacrificed horses and his intricate tattoos, carried the paternal lineage of a Siberian hunter. They would have looked different. Their physical features, the architecture of their faces, the tilt of their eyes, would have reflected their divergent deep ancestries, a visible testament to their different origins. And yet, they recognized each other. They shared a sword, a god, a way of life, a visual language of status and power. This means that your own search for belonging might be guided by a false premise, a quest for a singular source that never existed. Finding a single Scythian marker in your DNA doesn't mean you descend from a single unified tribe of genetic clones. It means you are connected, by a fragile strand of DNA, to a vast ancient network of exchange and movement that spanned a continent. It means your ancestors may have been the ones who were moving, riding with the tide, or they may have been the ones who were met, absorbed, and integrated into this magnificent cultural engine on the shores of the Black Sea or in the shadow of the Altai. It's a profound shift from a blood and soil identity, rooted in one sacred place, to a story of movement identity, defined by connection and flux. Your heritage is not a single pure stream leading back to a mythical founder. It's a braided river, a confluence of countless tributaries, just like the Scythians themselves. This revelation also forces a dramatic, ground-up reinterpretation of the archaeological record, making us rethink what we see when we open a kurgan. For a century, the Scythian triad of artifacts was seen as a blunt instrument of mass migration, a simple litmus test for the presence of a people. A bronze arrowhead found in a fortified settlement in Poland was taken as ironclad proof of a Scythian horde physically arriving and replacing the local population. The DNA says otherwise, with a quiet and devastating finality. The genetic data reveals that the spread of Scythian material culture was often a process of cultural diffusion and elite dominance, not wholesale biological replacement. The warrior's kit, with its advanced composite bow and deadly arrows, was the ultimate Iron Age IP, the must-have technology of the era. It was a highly desirable package of military hardware, prestige goods, and symbolic power. Local groups, whether they were the settled farmers of the forest steppe zone or the Celtic tribes of the Carpathian Basin, could, and clearly did, adopt the Scythian fighting style, the Scythian art, even the Scythian identity in the eyes of outsiders, without a single Scythian settler needing to permanently move in and raise a family. The genetics shows a complex, nuanced picture of localized admixture, with a trickle of biological influence rather than a tidal wave of bodies. A chieftain in what is now Hungary might bury himself with a full Scythian panoply, a goritos of arrows, a composite bow, a golden deer plaque, and his DNA, when tested, could be entirely local. A Central European farmer from a long-standing local lineage who had simply become Scythian in his cultural and political affiliations. The implications are staggering. It means the ancient world was far more interconnected and culturally fluid than a simple migration map with big, sweeping arrows would suggest. The Scythians were not just a people. They were a cultural phenomenon, a set of elite behaviors, a prestigious lifestyle that anyone with the ambition, the charisma, and the horses could join. This is the hidden truth of the steppe. Identity was a tool, a weapon, and a choice. And the story doesn't end with the Scythians. The final, thrilling act of this genetic mystery is the overthrow of the Scythian world itself, a genomic coda that reveals the cyclical nature of steppe power. The source notes contain a killer twist, a dark sequel found in the same data, the very same 2021 Science Advances study that uncovered the Scythian ethnogenesis, also documented their demographic demise and transformation. For centuries, the Scythians dominated the Pontic steppe. In the late Iron Age, around the 4th century BCE, they were challenged by a new power rising from the east, a people who also spoke an Iranian language and fought in a similar style, but with innovations like heavily armored cataphracts, the Sarmatians. The classical historians, again reaching for comfortable tropes, tell tales of a new, savage horde replacing the old, the Sarmatians wiping the Scythian slate clean. But the DNA reveals a much more profound and unexpected process, a genetic resurgence rather than a simple replacement. The Sarmatians were not just genetically distinct invaders who exterminated the Scythians. The data shows that the arrival of the Sarmatians corresponds to a dramatic genetic resurgence of eastern steppe ancestry in the western regions. Remember that beautiful cline, the gradient of amber and sapphire? The Sarmatian period saw the amber of the east push back, hard, into the west, overriding the western Scythian admixture profile with a new wave of eastern genes. It was a new genetic wave, flowing from the Altai, from the Urals, back into the very heart of Europe, shifting the gradient once more. The Sarmatian profile, with its own distinct mix and a notable shift in Y chromosome lineages towards eastern haplogroups, begins to overlay the old Scythian cline like a new coat of paint. This is not a simple, genocidal replacement. It's a new chapter of admixture, a new layer of the genetic palimpsest of the steppe, where the old text of the Scythians was scraped away and overwritten, but fragments of it remain, bleeding through. The Scythians were not erased in a puff of smoke. They were absorbed, remixed, and transformed into a new confederation that bore the Sarmatian name. The river of genes didn't stop flowing, it just changed its course, swelling with new tributaries. This is the ultimate lesson of the steppe, a rule of history written in bone and base pair. It was a crucible where the genetic and cultural identities of Eurasia were repeatedly melted down and reforged, time and time again, in a cycle of fusion, domination, and transformation. The Scythian mystery is not just a story of their origin, it's a story of their constant, dynamic transformation, right up to the moment their name faded from the history books, their blood still pulsing in the veins of those who came after, like the Sarmatians and the Alans, a silent legacy of the genetic gradient they created. To truly grasp the weight of this discovery, we need to hear from the voices that unearthed it, the scientists who spent years staring into the genetic abyss of the steppe, coaxing ancient molecules to reveal their secrets. The lead author of the pivotal 2021 Science Advances Transect, Guido Alberto Ganecchi Rusconi, synthesized the team's findings with a clarity that is impossible to ignore. The study, unraveling the history of the Scythians from a Central Asian time transect, concluded that the Scythian cultural phenomenon was not the product of a single, genetically homogeneous population. Instead, the genomic data reveals a complex tapestry of local admixture and long-range mobility. The formation of the distinctive Scythian gene pool was a singular major admixture event, a fusion of an eastern source related to the Kovsgol LBA herders and a western source related to the Srubnaya, and this new, composite profile then spread. But the key insight is in the follow-up, the nuance that prevents a new simplistic story. The mobility and admixture that defined the Scythian world followed this initial formation. It was a continuous, dynamic process, not a single migration pulse that stopped. This is corroborated and strengthened by the earlier foundational work of Peter de Barros Damgaard and Nina Marchi in the 2018 Nature study of 137 genomes. Their data established the primary east-west genetic cline, a gradient structure that fundamentally contradicts the idea of a uniform invading horde, showing instead that Scythians in different places were genetically different. They explicitly state that the ethnic label Scythian masks a deep genetic diversity, a confederation of distinct groups with diverse origins who came together under a shared cultural banner. The genetic structure of the steppe was a fluid continuum, not a mosaic of isolated, continuous tribes. The science is unequivocal. The old narrative, the one built on fear and the biased writings of their enemies, is a ruin. In its place, we have a new monument, built not of stone, but of sequenced base pairs, a testament to a world that was far more cosmopolitan, more interconnected, and more humanly complex than we ever dared to imagine. So, we return to that initial image, the tattooed warrior on the horizon, emerging from the feathergrass, and we see him with new eyes. We have completed our systematic genetic elimination, and the result is a profound, unambiguous resolution. The Scythian DNA was compared against every ancient civilization, and no single one matched. The Romans, the Greeks, the Celts, the pure Bronze Age titans like the Yamnaya, all were eliminated from being the sole source. The sole surviving lineage was not a lineage at all, not in the traditional sense. It was a fusion, a braided stream of Eastern Siberian hunter and Western European farmer, two populations that had not been in contact for millennia, meeting in the crucible of the early Iron Age to create something entirely new. The Scythian genetic mystery that scientists never expected is this. One of the most feared and iconic warrior cultures in history was not a closed biological tribe. It was a political and cultural confederation, a dynamic and multi-ethnic network bound by a shared idea, not a shared bloodline. The hidden truth is that the Scythian world was a genetic gradient, a living, breathing bridge between continents, where your identity was a matter of the horse you rode, the bow you wielded, and the golden stag you wore on your chest. The fearsome, unified horde of Herodotus was, in reality, a spectacular, ancient experiment in multi-ethnic nation-building on an epic scale. The story of the Scythians is no longer a simple tale of invasion and replacement. It is a mirror reflecting our own complex genetics, a reminder that the search for a single, pure ancestor is a journey into a myth, a phantom we chase in our own DNA. The true, powerful legacy of the steppe is not a line of pure blood. It is the thunder of hooves across the vast plain, the cry of a panther cast in gold, and the unbreakable, earth-shaking truth that we are all, in our deepest bones, a mixture. We are the children of the Cline, the heirs of the Confederation. The secret is out, and it changes everything. Now, if this blew your mind, you need to see what we've uncovered next. The genetic bombshell that proves the Scythians didn't just vanish. Their bloodline is still alive in a place you'd never guess. Hit subscribe, smash that bell, and watch the next video right now before the algorithm hides it from you. Trust me, you won't believe where the next chapter of this story is hidden. See you there. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thanks for staying until the very end. Goodbye for now.